Hey YouTube, just wanted to take a moment and make a quick video here about something that has come up several times just with my own friends and family, and that is, how much land do you really need to be self-sufficient? Well, assuming this is not the first YouTube video you have ever seen on the subject, there are plenty of other channels out there talking about this very subject. Some of these channels range anywhere from having just a small, like a suburban plot of land with a regular house and yard, maybe even in the city, all the way up to people who are out in the boonies and have hundreds of acres at their disposal. And they all have something to say on the subject. Now, you may be familiar with an infographic that went around a little while ago, talking about, how much land you're going to need to survive and growing grain and the number of people and that kind of thing. But there was a lot of kind of backlash on that particular infographic, as well as several YouTube videos just about that, talking about how wrong it was. Well, I don't know how wrong it was, and that really there's a lot of things that you need to consider. But before we kind of go down that path, there was actually a really strong argument that a self-sufficient homestead or piece of property is actually a myth, and that it doesn't exist, or rather it can't exist. Well, I kind of wanted to get this one out of the way first before we get into the rest of the video, in that I don't believe that to be true at all. I think that if it were true, we would have died out as a species a long time ago. But I think maybe a more pertinent question to ask isn't just how much land does it take to be self-sufficient, but rather also, what is your expected standard of living while living on this property? Are you expecting all the conveniences of the modern world, like electricity? Or are we thinking something more along the lines of, the large Amish populations who don't really do a whole lot with technology as a major keystone part of their lifestyle? Or are we talking about absolutely no outside influence whatsoever? You're responsible for all of your own food, clothing, tools, healthcare, everything. Well, if that last one is the scenario, then I think yes, there might be some merit to the whole self-sufficient homestead being a myth. But I really don't feel like that was ever the intention whenever somebody is asking this question. I think your average person who asks this question is really just that, your average person who is considering the idea of, kind of getting away from the city or moving out into the country, or maybe they do a whole bunch of backyard gardening and they're thinking, hey, I'd like to do a whole lot more. How much land do you need to be self-sufficient? Well, to answer this question, it actually depends on quite a few factors. Things like, how many people are you going to need to feed? How many people are in your household? How many animals, if any, do you have? Pets, livestock, chickens. All of these animals, both human and non-human, need to be fed. And are we talking about the level of self-sufficiency where they also will be able to be fed from the land in which you're considering? Or is it okay to go ahead and go out and buy feed for those guys? So it kind of depends on what your intention is. Also, some really important factors are going to be things like your terrain, your weather and climate, your ability to grow food, in the far northern reaches of Canada is going to be significantly different than, if you're in Florida. So your geographic location is actually going to matter quite a bit. Additionally, as far as your land is concerned, what access to resources do you have? Is your land going to be located on the coast where you're going to have access to the ocean? Or maybe like the Great Lakes if you happen to be in that area? Do you have a huge expanse of forest out your backyard? Are you in the middle of the city? All of these things matter as far as answering that question. And then also you have to consider, going back to the whole, what does it mean to be self-sufficient? Does this exclude any help from the community? Does this mean that the only place that you can get anything is only from within the borders of your own property? Or are you considering that, your neighbors and your local community count? So if you're going to have a self-sufficient homestead or piece of land, it would be along other tracts of land with other like-minded people who are trying to achieve the same goal, or what. So that again is going to determine the size of the land. So there's just so many factors that you have to consider that there is no right answer. But if you're like me, you're still looking for an answer. So how do you address this question? Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is kind of assess where you're at, mentally, financially. What is it that you actually want from the land? I mean, we say self-sufficient, and like I mentioned earlier, what does that mean to you? Obviously, the more independent you intend on being, i.e. making your own clothing, your own tools, all of that stuff, you're going to need a larger piece of land because really you're after the natural resources. So answer that first. For the purpose of this video, I'm just going to make the assumption that when it comes to being self-sufficient, we're just talking about food. We're just going to be talking about being able to feed yourself. When it comes to things like, clothing and tools, and, maybe you have a car or a tractor or something like that that you use, that you will have the ability to rely on your local community, wherever that is. We're just going to operate on a certain bunch of assumptions here that you're going to have access to these other things, but for the purpose of just feeding yourself, that's kind of where we're going to jump off from. Now, you still have to determine other things like, well, how many people are going to be in your party, and so that directly affects how much food you have to grow. And then again, you have to consider your geographic location. How much actual growing season do you have in order to grow this food? And then other things to consider, like diet. You're going to go just pure vegetarian, or you're going to go vegetarian with a few animals, because you don't need to eat meat every day. I want to eat meat every day, but you don't have to. Actually, you'd be better off if you ate a lot more vegetables, but I won't go down that road right now. So, operating from that point of view, just being self-sufficient, concerning food, now let's take a look at what that means as far as your average person. Well, I think the biggest determining factor here, really at the end of the day, is going to come down to money. I'm pretty sure there's not a whole lot of you out there that have a bottomless checkbook and you're just sitting there watching this video going, should I buy 50 acres or 1,050 acres? How much land do I need? I'm pretty sure that's not most of us. What is your budget? What is your capacity to buy land? Where do you want to live? Let's talk about that for just a moment, because that matters. If we're talking about, the Atlantic coast or the Northeast or anything like that, you know, the price of land, acreage, is going to be significantly different, you know, if you're in the heartland or if you're in the Pacific Northwest or, you know, if you're down along the Mexican border. So where is it that you want to live? Maybe you can't handle the cold, and so that is just right out, and you're really looking at a place like, say, Arizona or New Mexico. Well, how much money do you have? And based on that, how much land can you afford? Well, the land that you can afford is going to be determined somewhat based on the features of that property. So let's just talk a moment about the features. First and foremost, it doesn't matter how much land you have, how small or how big, you need water. What's the water situation? Is it a well, a spring? Is it a stream, a pond? Are you going to be relying solely on rain catchment? How much water you have on your property, or at least access to water, is going to be really important, especially since right now, with water at a premium, especially in the western states, it's a big deal. So something to consider. Maybe all you can afford is 1 or 2 acres, but it has water. Okay, well, let's work backwards from that. Based on what your expected standard of living is, which is really important to determine kind of up front, as well as your access to water, that's going to determine the technology that you're going to end up using. So, what do I mean by technology? Well, if you are at, 200 acres and you're not really expecting any outside help, and you're just going to be like a hermit kind of situation, you can probably expect a standard of living prior to the Industrial Revolution. You're going to end up making everything yourself with no outside help. And yes, we survived, and some would argue it was a great lifestyle. But, your computer, manufacturing, these types of technologies are just not going to be available to you. I mean, anything that you don't bring with you, eventually it's going to break down, and you won't be able to replace it because you're not looking for any outside help. So if you've only got a couple of acres at your disposal, as long as you have water, that's really the big one, then you have the benefit of modern technology. Aquaponics, hydroponics, you can, greenhouse, you can grow all year round, you can grow your own fish along with your plants, and you can do all of this in a very small space. So, getting enough, nutrients and protein and just food from a very small area is definitely possible. So, it's not so much about the land, but what are your intentions as far as technology, your expected lifestyle to have? I mean, if you're hoping to have a dishwasher and a modern vehicle and all this other stuff, then you're not going to need a whole lot of land, because you're going to have the benefit of all of the modern technologies, including fertilizers and specialty nutrients and that kind of thing. So just something to consider when it comes to how much land do you really need. It's just, look at your finances, look at what you actually want, and then get what you can get, and get the best that you can for the money that you have. And then once you have it, then you can really kind of plan out what it's going to look like for you, or maybe play out a couple of scenarios ahead of time and see what you're comfortable with, and at least this is going to give you a direction for you to go regarding buying some land, or at least making the determination as far as how much you're going to need. So anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Give me any comments that you have. maybe you have a homestead and you have something to say about it. I'd appreciate a note. Anyway, thanks for watching again. Pack up, pack out,